Hey there, business visionary builders. Our goal with this platform is to have real life business conversation with business leaders on their strategy and approach they've used to scale businesses. From building dream teams, weathering market storms, and staying ahead of the curve, I'll unpack some of those game-changing strategies, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. As you know, success doesn't come without its fair share of wisdom. On this episode, I'm looking forward to picking the brains of somebody I've known for almost a decade. Phil Ponsonby is the Group CEO of Midcounties Cooperative, with over 6,000 employees, a diverse group portfolio consisting of food, retail, including post office and pharmacies, a childcare business, travel, utilities, and having sold off their funeral business. They have 700,000 members, revenues in excess of $1 billion. Phil, so our audience can get more familiar on a personal note, let's do a quick round of questions. How many siblings are you?
I have 3 siblings.
And in the hierarchy, where do you come?
I'm the second youngest.
What was mum and dad's occupation?
So my dad was in the Royal Navy for many years. That was his main occupation. So he moved around quite a lot. And then when he settled, he was in the shipbuilding industry. My mother was a cook. She was the head cook at my primary school when I first started school.
Okay, so you always got fed school dinners?
I did, but it meant that I had no choice but to eat it all, because if I didn't eat it, then none of the other children would.
Did you go around for the second round?
No, but I used to get into the kitchen first thing in the morning, and sometimes I get into the pantry and help myself to a few of the biscuits that are in there.
Seen on the school bit, who was your favourite teacher or lesson at school?
My favourite teacher at primary school, there was a gentleman called Cedric Elkington, and he had come out of the army. He was a sergeant major in the army, and he was the strictest teacher you'd ever meet in your life. And he taught us our times table from a very, very young age. And if you couldn't answer what's 7 times 8 in 3 seconds, then you'd be in detention. But what he did was he instilled in us discipline and a learning, which meant that by the time we went to secondary school, we were ahead of the game in terms of mathematics, which is obviously a really important element in business. And so I think that was very early on, but a really good instruction to finance in the early days.
Describe your school or college report in a few words.
My school report, one of them said, I'm a natural leader. However, I would like to have fun more than take things seriously at times. So it was this sort of double-edged sword around, actually, yeah, I can lead, but equally I don't always take things too seriously. That was my school. College was likely to have a career in politics or something like that.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it was probably because I was studying British constitutional law at the time. So,
give us the earliest childhood memory that comes to mind.
Goodness, I think it was with my grandparents up in the Lake District in a camper van that didn't have a toilet, and that seemed to be a big deal. That's something I remember.
So you always make sure when with your travel business, there's always a toilet, right?
Yeah, and I've never been camping since.
What was the first book that left a lasting impression that impressed you?
I think probably a book called Fish, and it was about service excellence and about this fish shop, fish counter, fishmongers. I think it was based in Seattle, and it was how they created a brilliant business through customer service and everything else. It was a long time ago, but that was probably the first one. The books I read in my childhood tended to be about war and action and things, and so they didn't really, they were great books, but, in terms of what impressed me, I think that one gave me a lasting memory.
I think what that has told me is at a young age you enjoyed reading books.
We didn't have a lot of choice because we didn't have the technology that exists today, did we? So if you weren't allowed in front of the television, then you read books. That was what you did. So it was great.
Who was or is your business role model, particularly when you were growing up?
Obviously, Richard Branson was, because he was an entrepreneur. You just watched him taking a risk that he took. He was quite charismatic, I think. So I would say he was. I was always impressed with food retailers as well. So the Sainsbury family, John Sainsbury, the people like that, and Ken Morrison. So I remember sort of very early on thinking about, those guys and, they were achieving, but probably from a younger age, it would have been Bradson, I think. I remember Alan Sugar as well, but I sort of had a fairly dim view of Alan Sugar because my parents bought one of his hi-fi stacks and my friends all had Hitachis and things. And so, we ended up with this Amstrad thing, which I couldn't work out.
So look, let's go into business. Let's talk about the decision you made early in your career that you think was quite pivotal in shaping your path to becoming Group CEO. It's probably worth saying a bit of background on yourself. You've been within the co-op ecosystem for a very long time, and you've sort of worked your way from the bottom up. So what do you think sort of stood out for you that's been quite pivotal in shaping where you've arrived today?
So, I spent most of my career in food retail, but I think probably back in my mid-20s, I guess, I was given the opportunity to manage one of the country's largest retail stores, a hypermarket, about 140,000 square foot. And at the time, it was one of the 10 largest food retail shops in the country across any retailer. And it sold, obviously, food, but it also sold, it had a fishmongers, a restaurant, butchery, charcuterie, bakery. It had a florist, it had hairdressers, it sold fashion, it sold beds, electricals, cars, it had a garden centre. It had so many different product ranges and sections and functions. And I was in there for 3.5 years, and it was quite a risk taking it on because the previous general managers that had run it had all ended up out of work afterwards in one way or another because it was a tough shop to run and it was losing money. And so it was one of those opportunities. And I remember the director at the time saying to me, this will either end your career or put your name in lights as far as food retail. So it was a risk, but I took the risk. But what I learned from it was that I could have spent 100 years in that shop and I would have not accumulated the knowledge that existed amongst the people that worked in there because there's no way you could because of the skills and expertise that they all had. So you realize quite quickly that you wouldn't know as much as many of the people that worked for you. And therefore you had to rethink how you went about managing them, creating the right environment in which they could thrive. So trying to find out what were the barriers to their success were. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And some of it was about the people that were in the team. So you had to be, I think, quite bold as well and be prepared to remove some people out of the team. And so create an environment where people had unity, where they felt they were empowered to get on and do things. And then you had to trust them because you couldn't gain that knowledge that they had. And then I think the other thing that I learned more than anything is the power I had was to really stay close to the customers of the store because I might not know how to be a fishmonger or a butcher, or I may not know how to cook in a restaurant, but I could talk to the customers, and if they weren't happy about the way their salmon fillet had been cut or their food was served in a restaurant, then that was my power. And so I spent a lot of time focusing on what mattered to our customers and also empowering the team. And within a year, we turned the store around. It was a profitable store.
Do you think that was the pivotal moment that started taking you on the path to be noticed within the business, or was it something else?
Certainly, the success that we had in that store led to my elevation quite quickly. So I was promoted out of that store into a fairly senior role within the organisation. So yes, without doubt, clearly I'd achieved what they'd asked me to achieve. But I think more than anything for me, it stood me in good stead, and why I was able to take on the group CEO role here eventually is because here we had when I first took it on, obviously, as you mentioned at the start, lots of different businesses from food and funeral and childcare, travel and pharmacy, energy business. And a bit like when I was at the hypermarket, there's no way could I understand fully how each of those businesses functions in minute detail. There's just no way. And so, you can't be in the detail. You can't be trying to immerse yourself completely in those businesses, and you have to recognize what's your role. And so that was the learning. And I think it was a learning that I've been able to apply ever since, was that I don't seek to try and be an expert on everything, but I need to make sure that the people that are supported and given the right environment in which to operate, and that you focus on delivering for your customers more than anything else.
Just staying with that, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges you personally faced when you went through that transition of being a group CEO, and how did you overcome some of those challenges to get comfortable?
Well, I think the first thing, I mean, the people talk about CEO role being peerless, and it is, because clearly, and in most other roles that you have, you'll have peers, there'll be people on the same level as you, and, you can take them into your confidence, you can share some of the challenges you have with them. But also, you're never fully responsible for everything until you become a CEO. When you become a CEO, the weight of responsibility hits you almost overnight. And so that transition really was about that, was recognizing all of a sudden, I can't blame anyone else. Because everyone in this organization I'm responsible for, and therefore someone makes a mistake, it's down to me. So it really does hit you quite early on in that when you take on the role. And what you have to realize is that, actually you're only as good as your team. And again, you've got to be bold. If there's people in that team that, are sapping your energy or the business's energy, you've got to deal with that, be honest with them, do it in the right way. And then you've got to galvanize your senior team and make sure that they, that they're supportive, that you're all in the same place on things as much as you can be. But at the same time, don't surround yourself with yes people, because that won't do any favors. So I learned, early on that it's a lonely role, it's peerless. But if you have a good team around you, actually, it's a great role. And then the other thing is you've got to look outside the organization, because there are other CEOs out there, so you've got to network, you've got to build relationships, you've got to sit down with people that, have no agenda other than to try and help you and be helped. And then you share the challenges that you have. And that's really, really important to a CEO, is that you use that external network, as to your advantage.
But when you did go into that post role in 2018, you had quite a few moving parts within the business that you had to get to grips with. How did you prioritize, for instance, the top 3 things that you were going to focus on when you had such a diverse collective group within your portfolio?
Well, I think before taking on the role, so I took up my position in August 2018. I think I was appointed or confirmed in May of that year. And so I had a plan in May that's, a strategic plan around that I'd agreed with the board about making us a member-first organisation. So we're owned by our members, our 700,000 members, but how could we make that more meaningful? So how could we make that more relevant? And in other words, as a business at the time which transacted with lots of customers as well as our members, about 1/5 of our transactions were with our members. And my feeling was that we should try and get that to where it was the majority of our transactions. If over half of our business was with a membership, that would be a very powerful organisation. So that was a sort of strategic plan. But what happened, obviously, was just as I was taking over, we had a significant and serious problem with our energy business and over 400,000 customers. But it became quite clear that through some poor management decisions, we had a big area of loss in that business. And so my very first board meeting in September of that year was to inform the board that, there was a serious black hole in the energy business, and that had to be the priority. And so there was no real choice in terms of what was the number one priority. It was finding a solution to that. And I've spent my first year really focused on finding that solution, agreeing the deal with Octopus Energy to the joint venture, working with the board and working through that with the board. So that was, it was intense. It was a real area of focus. But I didn't take my mind off the longer term strategy. So there was 2 things that I wanted to achieve, as whilst focusing on that as a business priority, I wanted to create that membership strategy. And I also wanted to embed our values in the business. And what I mean by embedding the values is, we're a values-led organisation, we're a cooperative, we're owned by our members, but I never really felt that we fully embedded those values in everything we do. So I appointed a chief values officer onto my executive team, who had 25 years plus experience in the co-op world, and was able to say to him, you take this and you just make it meaningful in every single area of the business. And so that was a priority. And then developing that membership strategy, understanding how we would grow our membership, how we would get more of our members more involved in our businesses. Those were the top 3 priorities that I focused on.
And how do you think your leadership changed as a result of that, particularly as you were going and dealing with 2020, which we all know was the COVID hit?
Well, actually, the challenge with the energy business, which was really difficult, and it created us problems with our banking partners, et cetera, And it was a really challenging time. And I remember having to spend a lot of time with the board, much more, frequently than you otherwise would have done. But it created a resilience in us. We got through it and we came out the other end of it. And actually, we came up with a good solution. And it sort of felt like, as a team, we could face into anything. And so I think the last customers transferred from our energy business to Octopus in January 2020. And we thought, here we go, that's done. We can now settle down to a straightforward business plan. And of course, by March, we're in lockdown and a pandemic. But I think it created an inbuilt resilience in our team that and whilst it was very difficult and challenging for everyone, and we were certainly not immune to that, I just felt, and the difference with it also was that when I faced into the difficulty of the energy business, which was literally a month into my tenure as a CEO, it felt quite personal because I felt, well, this feels really unfair. I've just taken over as CEO and as much as I want to do lots of other things, I can't. I'm going to have to just focus on sorting this problem out. Whereas the pandemic and COVID, everyone was affected by it, so it didn't feel personal. It felt like we've got to deal with this. It was a very different scenario, different challenge.
Let's stay with that Octopus joint venture that you did on the utilities piece. You were thrown in on the deep end. Obviously, you said you took it personal as opposed to COVID. What did you learn about in terms of how to make some of those tough decisions moving forward when you're looking at investments and how you're approaching them?
I think firstly, you've got to be clear on what your goals are. What's your vision? What's your, what are your strategic objectives? And try as much as possible to keep aligned to those. Sometimes you also got to be prepared to walk away from them and change tack because clearly, so we had a strategic goal of developing and creating a big energy business and I'm saying to the board, I don't think we can do that. I think it's going to risk the rest of our businesses but we also recognize that, as a cooperative, we want to help our members in choosing energy suppliers. And so the partnership with Octopus was a creative solution, which was to say, we can still stay in the game without the risk and the challenges and actually in the game with a partner that can go and secure investment and capital in places where we can't. And so it was being imaginative in terms of how you go about solutions. But more important than anything was staying very close to all of our stakeholders. And those stakeholders, the board of directors elected by the members, you've got to be really close and work with them because they've got input into that thinking, they've got concerns. You also have stakeholders who are your financial partners, your banks, lenders. You have to put a lot of time and effort into communication and listening and, discussing the challenges and making sure everybody understands and everybody's supportive or on side or, that everybody's sort of rowing in the same direction, I guess.
So do you have like a checklist in terms of if you are looking at doing some investments that you're like, okay, it has to meet these pillars before you would make a decision as to whether it's the right decision?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, if you're going to invest in something, you need to ask yourself, is this aligned to our strategy? Because if it's not, why you're investing? It's because it should be. If you set a direction of travel where you want to achieve growth or you want to achieve efficiencies or whatever it may be, is this an investment aligned to that? And then you'll have, your own hurdle rates, whether that's return on investment, return on capital employed. We have different hurdle rates for different businesses because some of them you think about in the short term, some you think longer term. Is it a good use of our members' money? Because, would we be better off using that money in another way? So they're all the things that you work through. And for us also, as a cooperative, it's not just about financial return. It's about, what impact will this have for the longer term in terms of our sustainability? What will this do for our communities, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a range of things that we consider. But first and foremost, we just ask ourselves, is this aligned to our strategy?
As you know, a lot of CEOs have to think both short and long term. Therefore, can you share a moment where you've had to take a significant risk as a leader and what was the outcome of that and what did you learn from that, particularly when you have to balance that short and long term?
The obvious is during the pandemic because, we were running food retail business, travel business, childcare nurseries, pharmacies, funeral. And I can remember the sort of early days, meeting every day with the executive team. So we were meeting 7 days a week, making very fast decisions because we had to abandon the usual protocols and processes. You just couldn't, refer things to committees or put them through portals. It was, no, we've got to make decisions fast. And so things such as, the travel business went from being very busy, a successful business to a real problem overnight because all everybody wanted was refunds. And so, for example, you could have said, actually furlough all of our colleagues and just put an automated email response out there. We made a decision not to do that. We said, actually, whilst it's going to cost us more money in the short term, we will keep our colleagues in place so that our customers that have booked holidays have a real person to speak to. They know what's going on, with a view that they will stay with us in the long term because they'll feel they were treated right through that process and through that time. In our childcare nurseries, we closed 2/3 of our nurseries, but the contracts with parents were quite clear that if that nursery was closed for a reason beyond our control, we could still charge them fees. Well, that just, so contractually we could have done it, but it wouldn't have been fair. So you're making those kinds of decisions, but what's core to it is you make decisions based on your values. There might be small print, there might be contracts, but actually what's fair at the end of the day. And you think about the long term. So, okay, it'll cost me more money today and I'll lose quite a few millions as a result of that decision. But hopefully in the long term, people will remember and they'll think, actually, that's a brand that treated me well during that process. So that's what you're doing all the time. The nurseries that we kept open because they were on NHS sites. That was a really tough decision because I remember people saying to us, but how can you ensure that the children are 100% safe? And I said, I can't. I don't know enough about this thing, but what I do know is it appears to be affecting older people and the NHS are in the front line. And so if we don't open those nurseries, those doctors and nurses, they can't go into work potentially, or they're going to find it harder. So you're just weighing up decisions all the time. And I think you've got to think about where your values set and what's core to that when you make the decision.
So being a cooperative, you're going to have a lot of unique challenges in leading a community-based cooperative. How do you address those when you spoke about not only the members, but the governing board and then the management team? How do you put that all together and get things done?
I think firstly, and this is probably easy for me from the amount of time I've spent in the co-op, firstly you have to recognise that, a co-op is not just another brand name for a business. It's a completely different model of ownership. So, we are 100% owned by our members who are pretty much our customers and our colleagues. So first and foremost, their interest in us is not all about a return on dividends or a return on investments, like dividends through a return on investment. It's about how we do business and what we do and how we treat people and how we interact with them in their communities. So you have to put a lot of effort and focus into understanding what people really, really want in their communities. And that might not be shiny shops, or it might not be investments. It might be just helping local groups out. It might be ensuring that you're fair to your colleagues. And that can be challenging because, sometimes people say, I want you to keep that shop open, but the shop's losing money. And so that's not great for the rest of our members because actually they're subsidizing it. And so they can be quite difficult challenges. The membership elect the boards. It's a board of 16 people. And the board, a third of the board are up for election every year. And so, it can be the case that you lose directors off the board and you get new ones in, and so you get a churn, which means you're spending quite a lot of time helping people to understand the business and how it's run and et cetera, and also responding to different viewpoints and different attitudes because people come from very different backgrounds and very different views about things. So, but that's what makes it wonderful as well, is because it's just, the reality is that our board of directors are representative of our membership who come from our communities, who shop in our shops, who put their children in our nurseries. So as a management team, if we're not listening to them, we're not listening to our members. And I said to you earlier, first and foremost, that's my role, is to make sure that we're delivering for our members and our customers.
So how do you balance that with growth then? That is also quite challenging because you're trying to satisfy the need of those members, but also you're trying to deliver growth as well at the same time. How do you get that balance right?
In terms of our business planning, so we tend to look at things three ways. So how do we get more out of what we already have? How do we grow scale for long term? How do we deliver a co-op difference? So we tend to look at those three things, and you balance your capital investment and your resources across those three areas. Sometimes they're connected. So you grow your membership, that gives you better information. You understand your customers better, means you can do right by them. You can do better things for them. So those things are connected. But in terms of investing in so the things we talk to the board about a lot are what are our strategic assets and what are our non-strategic assets. What I mean by that, our strategic assets are, trading businesses that you see for the long term. Yeah, they're formats which they're the right for you for longer term, or it's your headquarters. It's a strategic asset where you're supporting your businesses from. And you have non-strategic assets, which may be non-trading properties, or they may be trading properties which no longer fit your long-term strategic format. Therefore, you've got to be prepared to, exit non-strategic assets and invest in strategic ones. And so if you can think about that and talk to the board in those terms, it helps everybody to understand why we're maybe, closing a store in one location, but investing in a new nursery in another.
And how would you say, in regards to a traditional business, what do you think they could learn from a cooperative model?
Well, I mean, firstly, I
would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. It's to recognise that actually there are great businesses in all the different ownership models. And just because businesses are PLC doesn't mean to say they don't have values or they're not invested in their communities, because many of them are. And I can highlight lots of businesses that I admire that are not cooperatives, that are either in public or private ownership. But I suppose with us, because we're owned by our membership, who are our customers and our colleagues, is important. No point talking in a corporate language to your membership or trying to impress them with corporate speak, because they're not impressed by it. It's important that you're authentic and that you keep your feet on the ground, and that you make decisions, as I was saying earlier, which aren't always about the bottom line. I think sometimes I've seen that sometimes when people have joined us, it's that they talk about targeting customers, they talk about extracting more value out of customers. That's not a language we like, because actually our view is if you can help your members in their day-to-day, the more you can help them, the more you can provide them with products and services, the more they'll trade with you. That's positive. But it isn't about trying to kid them into buying something they don't need. There's an element of that sort of authenticity, I think, in terms of how you show up as a business.
So just on that note, though, we spoke earlier about financial institutions with the utilities business satisfying what was a not underperforming business. How do you satisfy the banks and also the co-op members, get that balance right? Because that's quite a balancing act, let's be honest, because on one end, you need to bring income in to pay back out for any investments that you've made, but you also need to satisfy who are your members. How do you get that right?
I think being careful about who you work with in terms of financial partners, who your lenders are. We rely on lenders. I mean, because the nature of our business is that, our cash flow ebbs and flows quite significantly. We've got a food retail business, which means you bring a lot of cash in certain times of the year. We've got a travel business, which means, you bring a lot of cash in certain times of the year, but then you're paying suppliers at other times of the year. So it ebbs and flows quite a lot. So, a really good level of a revolving credit facility to deal with that. So you need good partnerships in that respect. But equally, I think certainly all of the four lenders we work with, they've also got objectives and they've got sustainability targets and they want to show up as good institutions. And so you can align some of those elements. So, for example, when we went through our last refinancing, we recognized that all of the partners had sustainability objectives. And so we were able to exchange better credit terms for meeting certain sustainability targets, so CO2 emission reduction, greenhouse gas emission reduction, those sorts of things. And so the banks agree with us better rates as long as we hit these sustainability targets. So that's aligning your values and your objectives through, and you only do that through conversation and understanding. I think the one thing we do benefit from is that the relationship managers we work with from our lenders have a good understanding of us, and that's important.
So going back to having these such diverse portfolio and you've got limited time, there is only 24 hours in a day and 365 days in a year. How does you balance that and also be able to go home and switch off?
Firstly, as I was saying at the start, that I learned from my time in the hypermarket is recognizing that you can't be in the detail of all those businesses. And if you try to be, you will fail. Maybe there's some organizations where it's a very narrow field of business and therefore you could be, but ours isn't. And it's complex and it's a very different operation running a childcare nursery than running a convenience store, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so you need good people. And if you've got good people, the more you trust them, the more I find that they respond. Say, for example, I don't contact any of my team past sort of 6 p.m. at night via email. And I don't contact them at weekends. And I never have done, unless I get a customer issue, because I put our customers first, our members first. So if I get a customer issue that comes through, which I deem to be relatively serious or problem, then I will do. But other than that, I don't, because I feel that actually, I want them to get on with their jobs. And it's the same as when I go on holiday, put my out of office on a Friday night. If I'm off for 2 weeks, they won't hear from me 2 weeks. If they have a problem that they need to get hold of me, they can do. But I will not spend my holiday emailing my team, because as much as anything, I'm saying to them, I trust you to run this business. And therefore, I think that takes some of the weight of responsibility off you, because it delegates that weight of responsibility to them. They recognize that, which means that when you go home, you can switch off and you can do different things. And I think for me personally, that's important. I'm not saying that's right for everyone. I know some people don't work that way, and some people are immersed in their business 7 days a week. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying for me personally, not the way I operate. And I think that helps me to enjoy my home life as well as my work life.
What do you think every leader should do that they don't do? I mean, you just talking about switching off is a really interesting one, because that would suggest to me that you allow a bit of headspace for you to have a bit of creativity and think out of the box as well, because you can get burnt out constantly being in the business and you're not bringing in innovation and new ideas because you're not stopping to think as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have an intensity in a business without needing to work 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. Personally, I will spend time reading when I'm not at work, and that might be reading about business stuff, but that's my choice. And so I use that time when I'm not in work at learning about things that are relevant to work as well. So it's not all spending all my life on the golf course when I'm not at work. So I do immerse myself in terms of learning and understanding. I think in terms of what I would say leaders that perhaps should do more of that perhaps they don't, maybe there's a couple of things. One is speak in plain speak. I get sort of quite frustrated by people that use these terms, which I know that maybe they're corporate or whatever, and I don't know who they're impressing. It doesn't impress me. And I just think that most people would prefer you to speak in plain language. Say what you think, be honest, ask the right questions, and don't hide behind lawyers and PR agencies. Tell it as it is. It mistakes in that respect. So I think talking in plain speak is important. And I think the other thing, spend as much time in the front end of your business as the back end of your business. And what I mean by that is, if you've got shops, spend time in shops with colleagues and customers or nurseries. This week I've been in, 4 shops, 2 nurseries, a travel branch, a post office. And you just go in and say, how you doing? What's going on? You just learn stuff, but more than anything, keep your feet on the ground. So I think I would say leaders, it's so easy to get wrapped up in so many meetings and conferences and really important stuff, but just try and carve out that time to spend in the front end of your business.
What mechanisms have you used that have helped you? You've mentioned a bit about going out and speaking to members, meeting people on the ground, reading books. Is there anything else that you could share that has sort of helped you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to put things into perspective and recognize why you're here. I mean, primarily the CEO is here to, run the organization on behalf of its owners. And in our case, our owners are our members. And so, a board appoint me to run the business on behalf of our members. And so, first and foremost, I'm asking myself, if I look back this year, have I done a better job for our members than I did the previous year? And am I doing right by them? And so that motivates me, constantly thinking about how could I do a better job for our members? How can I listen to them more? The AGMs, our last 2 AGMs have had over 1,000 members turn up at them and engage and ask questions and get involved. And for me, that's success, because okay, you might say, well, you've got 700,000 members, only 1,000 turn up, but that's a lot of people in a room engaging. And so I think I ask myself that question constantly. Am I improving for our members this year over last year? I try to evaluate things in simple terms on a scale of 1 to 10. How well did that go? It's just keep evaluating and keep asking yourself the question. But I find stuff really interesting. You can't imagine how great it is to sit on a floor in a nursery and play Lego with a 3-year-old and be paid to do it. I mean, that's pretty good. And okay, or going to a food store and have a conversation with someone about, the bend on a banana or whatever it may be, or go into a travel agency and talk about the best destinations or the newest cruise ship that's being launched. So we've got really interesting businesses. That's great. So that motivates me. I find it interesting, and I love listening to people and hearing about stuff and talk to them. And keep reading and learning and networking and trying to immerse yourself in as much information as you can.
If you were speaking to a CEO who's going into their first post, irrelevant of industry, and you've worked in quite a few, you've got a diverse portfolio, what advice would you give them through the lens of your own experience?
Expect the unexpected, because there will certainly be things that will come your way that you didn't expect, and you've got to be ready for that. But don't fear it, because actually it's part of the role. It will happen. You will not be fully ready for the role, even if you think you are. So you've got to commit to keep learning and learning through others, and, building those networks, sharing your challenges and your issues. And you'll find out usually that most others CEOs got the same problems or challenges, because that really helps. So I would really say put as much time into, you'll immerse yourself in your business and you'll be very inwardly focused, but you must carve out time to network and get out and speak to others and talk to other people. That's really important for your sort of support network. The other thing I would say is follow your instincts. If you've got a team and, after a few months, that some of that team aren't right for you, and it might be because they're popular underachievers or they're unpopular high achievers, but they're probably not right for your team, then you've got to make that move. You've got to be prepared to do that, because otherwise the further it goes on, the harder it is. And it's a credibility thing, because people look at you and think, why are you tolerating that? Why are you not doing something about it? It's balanced, because I don't think you should go in like a bull in a china shop and just start wrecking people's careers because you can. But I think usually your instincts tell you that, and and no one will make that decision for you. That's a decision you have to make yourself.
And looking where you are today and looking back, did you ever see yourself where you are today, or did it sort of happen because of luck of people along the way, or was there a drive or something within you that was the driving force for you?
I don't think I didn't have a career plan that was, I want to be the CEO of a co-op. I always felt quite confident in my abilities to take on challenges and take on any type of challenge. I felt that, I could look at a problem or look at a set of businesses and I could understand them and I could work with a team that's in there to improve them. I've always felt quite confident in that. It was never a case of, well, if you gave me the role, I wouldn't take it because I wouldn't feel I could do it. But I equally didn't have it as a plan. And so when I moved my family from the south of England to the Midlands, it wasn't to become the CEO of Midcounties Cooperative. It was to come and run the food business, which is the job I was doing down south. But it felt as if I needed a change and I wanted a fresh challenge. And because I knew Midcounties had other businesses in addition to food, I was hoping that if I did a good job in the food business, they would give me responsibility for maybe travel or theatre or something. But at no point did I really think that I will become the CEO. And it was only probably a few months before I actually became the CEO that conversation took place. But once the conversation took place, I was confident that I could do it, albeit I didn't know there was a challenge in the energy business, or there was going to be a pandemic and a war in Europe and all those other things down the line. But even so, I felt like I could do it because I felt that I had an MO, which was about looking at being honest about what's in front of you, accepting that you will not know everything that the people know that work for you, really focusing on your customers, or in our case, our members, and listening to what they're saying to you, and then go after it. And so, that was where I was at.
So, Phil, you've been here for quite a while now, and you've done a great job. I've known you for a number of years, and I've always thought you've been open to ideas, new approaches, networking. Do you think that is the key to a successful leader, is that openness? Because there are a lot of businesses out there where they are, a lot of the time, they're struggling because of the leadership. Let's be honest. Yep. Therefore, is there something unique in your approach that you think has helped you excel in that process?
I don't know if it's unique. I suppose my wife will say to me, when I became a COO or then a CEO, she said, just because you've got that title doesn't mean that you're Billy Big Bollocks now. And what she means by that is, just because you're the CEO or the COO, you don't have all the answers. That doesn't suddenly elevate you into
wise woman,
godlike creature. It just means that you've got a bigger weight of responsibility on your shoulders. And the clue to it is the people that are around you always. And so if you're not open to ideas or challenge or suggestions, then you'll fail without a shadow of a doubt, because the minute you start believing because you've got 3 stripes, you know more than everyone else, I think you're doomed for failure. And that's something that stayed with me forever. And, some people become CEOs or leaders and they suffer from hubris. They walk into a room and the ego is overwhelming. And you don't get the best out of people if you're like that, I find. So I try to be as normal as possible and, give people the opportunity to say what they think. So whether that's, my weekly vlog where they can comment and say what they like, or whether it's when you're out and about and you're talking to them and you just ask them straight, they tell me what's really annoying you right now, and have the conversation. So I think if you're prepared to work like that, for me personally, that I get the best out of my team as a result.
How do you approach succession planning within the business?
We try to think ahead, and we try to make sure that we're creating a succession environment. And what I mean by that is, rather than having you can have leadership development programs, and they're important, but increasingly what you have to do is create environments where people can naturally lead so that they can feel free to make decisions or get involved in things they otherwise wouldn't get involved in, because that sets them up for when they get an opportunity to take on a new role. And that's even more important today than it's ever been, because I think, some of the jobs that exist today won't exist in 5 years' time because AI will take them out, but there'll probably be new jobs that don't exist today. So if you just look at things on a linear basis and think everything's about a pathway to a role, I think you get it wrong. But what you've got to do is just make sure that people are equipped with those sort of general management skills, that, things I was talking about in terms of how to listen to your customers, how to listen to your people, how to think about financing and planning, they're general skills. Then, people can move from function to function. So we've got great examples in our businesses of people that started off in food that now work in travel, or people started off in food that now work in nurseries or in utilities, because they've developed those general skills and they've been able to move across from function to function. And that's good for their career development, because obviously they're in getting a broader view of life and business. So very important that you do that. And I think also taking risks for people. What we've said here, and part of my legacy really is I want us to be an organisation where the vast majority of our senior team, our executive, are developed from within. And so that takes time, and you've got to get an energy around that. So it's an ambition.
What would the future look like for you post-co-op, or is your legacy with co-op because you've been there such a long time?
I think, when I retire from co-op, it will be a clean break. But that isn't to say I wouldn't want to get involved in, to some extent in other businesses, maybe, and either on a sort of part-time basis or something like that, because I think I spend quite a lot of time mentoring, because I think you've got to give people, and it's not to say that you have all the answers, and sometimes you learn as much when you're mentoring as you give. But I do think there's an opportunity, if you build up all that knowledge through mistake and experience, why not share that a bit and give that back to some people if you get the opportunity to. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll do that. I would like to also buy myself a boat and just go off sailing somewhere. But
we might need a sailing license for that. Phil, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. You've been a part of and associated with the Inner Circle boardroom for a number of years, and having attended our in-person events as well. Would you be happy to share a few words of wisdom in terms of how that's personally helped you?
As a CEO, I was talking earlier about the importance of networking and learning from peers. that are in other organizations, because within your own organization, you won't have a peer as a CEO. And I found that really helpful to attend some of those sessions where there were, MDs and CEOs, and they were talking about the challenges they had with either, property portfolios or capital raising, how they'd sort of gone about that. So you're learning all the time. That was really, really helpful. And then, of course, I got the opportunity to talk about our businesses. And I remember most of the people in the room looking, saying, why are you trying to run all these businesses? Are you mad? So what is a co-op? But it was quite helpful in terms of shaping some of that thinking. And I built contacts, and it's free consultations, isn't it? It's, you can go and spend a lot of money with the big accountancy firms and the specialist services firms. And actually, sometimes this information is there with people that can give you that advice for free, which is great.
Phil, you have a business to run and you're going to have to dash. I'm not sure which one you're focused on right now, but I'm going to let you go and run those businesses. And I look forward to catching up with you over a coffee soon.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's all for today's episode with Phil. If you found this valuable, you're in for a treat. We've got a treasure trove of interviews with visionary business builders, all sharing their hard-earned insights. Don't miss out on new releases. Subscribe to the Inner Circle Boardroom channel via LinkedIn or YouTube. Hit that notification bell icon to stay in the loop for our next deep dive with a visionary business builder. Until next time, keep aiming high and building smart.